I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Australia Winemaker Special series. Across these 4 episodes, recorded in December 2022 and January 2023, we'll be exploring the Australian winemaking scene in the company of 4 different winemakers based in New South Wales, Yarra Valley, King Valley and Geelong. Wines from the first 3 guests in the series, Mayfield Vineyard, Rob Dolan Wines and Pizzini Wines, are all represented in the UK by Notria & Co. And wines from Mayfield Vineyard and Rob Dolan Wines can be tasted in London at the Australia Trade Tasting 2023. We continue the series today in the company of Joel Pizzini of Pizzini Wines. Joel gives us the Pizzini family origin story, takes us through the start of the Pizzini brand. He gives us a King Valley regional tour, talks establishing Italian alternative varietals, fruit sourcing in the King Valley, takes us in depth into their soil mapping project with Pedro Parra, and describes Pizzini Wines' first foray into the UK market. Enjoy.
I guess our story begins with one of my great uncles. He essentially picked up a flyer off the wharf, fluttering around in the wind, no doubt, said, "Come to Australia and the land of opportunity." And that basically set the course for my great uncle Alfonso and a few of his friends to jump on the ship and come to Australia. So he sort of started working and settling in northeast Victoria, and he just started writing letters to encourage the rest of the family to come over. So then eventually my grandfather, Robert Pizzini, his brother, George Pizzini and Arnold Pizzini, and their wives and children, one by one, and also my grandfather's parents came over as well. So my grandfather, he came over in so it was the late 50s. So they had my grandmother Rosetta, she was pregnant with the 4th, and my father Fred, he was 3, and older brother Rinaldo and older sister Eleanor. So they then came to they settled in at Fremantle. They came to Fremantle, which is in Western Australia, and then they sailed into the Melbourne Wharf. So my grandfather was a fitter and turner by trade, and was brought out by the Australian government to work on the Great Snowy Mountain Scheme, the hydroelectric scheme, which was basically starting to put electricity, a mass electricity into Australia, really, to supply Melbourne and Sydney.
Yeah, super interesting. Yeah, and I know that the period that you're talking about there is, it sounds like it's super long time ago, but it's only the 1950s. And what part of Italy are we talking about here when you're talking about the relocation?
Yeah, so they came from the northern parts of Italy, so Trentino Alto Adige, and they lived right up in really close to the Italian-Austrian border close to Bolzano.
Okay, amazing.
So
amazing. And interesting as well. Another really cool, literally wine region as well. So maybe there's a connection there as well. So
the connection largely is that they settled in the mountain areas of northeast Victoria. So they settled in around Bright, which is the ski slopes of Australia. So it's the foothills of the mountains. So essentially it's a mini version of where they came from. So the mountains aren't quite as big as the Alps of Italy. But anyway, they settled and integrated extremely well into the Australian community. And essentially they started to work within the community. They started a restaurant in one of the local communities. They found that they couldn't get a decent bowl of pasta, so they had to start a cafe. And then at that time, the Australian government was promoting tobacco. So tobacco was one of those industries that the government was backing, and it was really to open up agricultural land and agriculture in a bigger way into in Australia. So we collectively, with the Pizzini brothers and wives, they started a tobacco farm. At the start, it was a share farming system. So my family would go and it's like a lease system. And so if a farmer had a spare block of land that he wasn't using, I'd ask for permission to see if I could utilise his land. We would share the profits. So it was a share farming system, sharing the profits. If you made no profits, you didn't make any money, and you would share equipment, tractors, and so forth. So they started in that program, and then once they'd earned enough money, they then became landowners, and then eventually they became the biggest growers of tobacco in the Southern Hemisphere. So as a business, they were really. So my grandfather built all of the machines and all of the houses and drying kilns. Because back then there wasn't the infrastructure for someone to come and just build it for you, and they really couldn't afford to do it anyway.
Yeah.
So they all had management skills and business skills as a collective group. But then the Australian government started to disincentivise tobacco growing, and then the family farm got broken up, and then that split the brothers up and their families into, and they all bought different parcels of land. Sorry. And then we bought into the King Valley, which is about an hour away from where the original Pizzini farm was. And it was largely, like the criteria was, centred around growing tobacco. There's plenty of water, there's good sunshine, on the river flats it's sandy, clay loamy, quite fertile soils. So ideal, and low soil salinity. But fortunately, it's in a nice, beautiful valley, and there's some really great hillsides that are producing some really great wines. So as the tobacco industry shut down, we then started to get into grapes. And the way that we got into grapes was through Brown Brothers. Brown Brothers Family Wine Company is our biggest local winery. I think they do maybe 15 to 20,000 tonnes of fruit. So they're quite a large wine family. And they got wiped out by a hailstorm. This was some 40 years ago now, or 30 years ago, just as they were starting to expand their operation. So then as a risk management, they started to ask old tobacco growers if they could start growing grapes for them. So we started growing Riesling for them, and Chardonnay, Cabernet, Shiraz and Merlot, and all of the international varieties were starting to really take off in Australia.
Gotcha.
Background in the sort of late 80s was the the Italian wines and what we're calling the alternative wine movement was just starting, basically. So we planted Nebbiolo in 1989. It was our first Italian variety, and then followed by Sangiovese and a variety called Verduzzo, which is quite uncommon, and it's from the Venice side of Italy, tucked up along the Croatian-Italian border. Arnice, Pinot Grigio, and that's really the beginning of
And then in terms of the connection between growing for Brown Brothers and actually bottling your own brand, had that transition already happened in this part of the story where you already starting to plant those alternative varietals?
Yeah, I guess we had always had the visions of producing our own brand whilst we were growing for other people. Yeah. And it wasn't until 1994 when we produced our first wine under the Pizzini label. It was still Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, and Riesling. It was still the international varieties, and then as we developed, we started to introduce more of the Italian varieties. Back in the first one was 1997. Was our first commercial release of Sangiovese, and we'd been releasing a few dozen of the Nebbiolo, but it was very small production at that stage.
It's absolutely fascinating that the name is still there on the label, and all of that I think is contained there. But I'm also just curious, what has the region kind of become now? In terms of if we were to sort of stand out in your property now, what would we kind of see, and what are the sort of sizes that we're talking about now in terms of what is your land and the production that it draws from?
So I guess as a region, we're certainly known as the Italian varieties sort of region of Australia. And it's a place where a lot of other wineries that are based in other places or other regions come and source their alternative variety.
Yeah,
we're lucky. We live in a really beautiful valley. We've got a really beautiful, fresh, clean King River. Is named after one of the an explorer that runs through the centre of the valley, and it's where we all go swimming and fishing. So we're extremely lucky. We're flanked by two mountains that where we're sort of setting a mountainous range. They're not huge. They sort of get up to about probably 800 metres above sea level. And our vineyards sort of peak at about 400 metres above sea level. It's about the height of where our vineyards are situated. So I have three different vineyard sites. So we're located. They're located within the King Valley. One is in the upper reaches of the King, and it's quite a cold climate. So I've got Pinot Grigio and Prosecco planted in that environment because it's quite marginal and it's really great for producing really top quality whites. And then another branch is in a sort of a drier, more of a shaly rock a vineyard, which has lovely layers of slate, and it's very heavily mineralised soil. So I'm really excited. And that's just a new purchase for us. So we'll be starting to make some wines coming off that vineyard. But they're still nice, undulating hillsides. We're surrounded by the Great Australian Bush. So there's a lot of bushland that surrounds our environment. So bushwalking, skiing, water skiing, eating and drinking, and we have a really strong food and wine culture that runs through the region.
Yeah, amazing. And I think something that you've mentioned there, Joel, which is I think will be interesting to the listeners as well, is just that exploration of what you're calling, and what more broadly known as alternative varietals. And I'm just curious then, is it then a case of maybe they were planted due to familiarity, or because they were known to you, and just curious about how they have sort of spread, I guess, to other growers, and whether kind of retrospectively there are similarities maybe between some growing areas in Italy that actually mean that those varieties perform better, or maybe there are differences which mean that they show different things.
Yeah. Look, that's a great question, because our township does share some similarities in the sort of like the temperature the climatic conditions, similar sort of rainfall and similar sort of heat patterns, whilst in Tuscany, if we're using Sangiovese as an example, they've got more calcium soils, we've got more acidic. So their soils are really quite opposite to the larger part. So I tend to celebrate it's our version of Sangiovese, it's our version of Nebbiolo, and sort of celebrate the variety. And I'm really aiming to create wines that show off the varietal expression and become true to that variety. So it's and we're using a lot of sort of like the vineyard management techniques to ensure that we have mature fruit. So we give ourselves the best opportunity to do that. And I guess we did start off small. And what the way that we were quite fortunate in the time of sort of like essentially Australian history, where we just we made a little bit of Nebbiolo and we were making a little bit of Sangiovese at the time, and we were introducing it to the sommeliers and the restaurateurs in Melbourne, because Melbourne's 3 hours away from us, and that's our major city. Of Victoria, and we were lucky enough to sort of gain some really great relationships and friendships, and found that they became great champions of our wines, and it really helped give us the confidence that we were doing the right thing and we were on the right pathway. And obviously we've got a lot to learn, and we had a lot to learn and still have a lot to learn on how to make great wine, but really gave us that confidence that we were heading in that right direction. And they became strong ambassadors, and they would go and really introduce Sangiovese and Nebbiolo to their drinkers to say, look, I know that you're going to love this, so try this. And, and that just started that process of converting people over to open up their scope for drinking and not just have it as the mainstream Cabernet Shiraz Merlot palette. So, and that's been a very huge journey for us, and it's a tireless journey, and especially at the time people they didn't have the confidence in saying the variety. They were really, really scared to put themselves out there, and nervous to say Nebbiolo and very nervous to say Sangiovese. To the extent that we make a Sangiovese Shiraz blend, and when people were coming to our cellar door, they would always say, "Can I taste the Sangiovese? Taste the Shiraz, please." They would never say Sangiovese Shiraz, because they just didn't have that confidence. And it was so much so that I would say that you're not allowed to taste anything else until you've tasted this, and then we'll go on to the next wine. And you're actually not allowed to leave this place until you've tasted this. So we were gently forcing people to sort of jump out of their comfort zone. But once they'd actually tasted and we walked through them, the new tastings, the new flavours that they were experiencing, they would actually go, "Oh, I quite like this," and and that's the wine that they walked out the door with at our place. So it's been an amazing journey, and look, now we're in a completely different phase of the alternative varieties here in Australia. It's really booming at the moment, and people are really coming into the King Valley for the diversity of varieties that we offer. Which is really exciting. And we're lucky we have a really great climate within our region that it can really successfully produce a very diverse range of wine varieties. So we're lucky, and I sort of break it down into climate zones, that we've got cold climate vineyards at 800 metres above sea level, producing some really great sparklings and great Pinot Grigios and Sauvignon Blancs and really top class, high class white white wines. And then we have the cool to warm zone and the cool and then the warmer zones. So that just having that diversity through the climate helps us to create some great, be able to have the capacity to have Riesling and Sangiovese planted side by side and make really classy versions of both of those wines. So we're really extremely lucky to have that diversity. And then if you layer the soil differences over the top of that, then the complexity gets even bigger. So for me, it's a really exciting region to make wine because of all of that diversity. It's also a huge amount of information to gather and also understand, but being able to make a wide range of different varieties successfully, it, to me, makes winemaking exciting, that I'm not just making one variety 5 different ways, or year in, year out.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And it's a great feather to our region that we can successfully do that.
We obviously started off in the right place, talking about the family. And is it a case of everything that you're making now is sourced directly from your own production there, or you're actually tapping into, as you say, those different sites and I guess the different diversity really that you've got on hand in the King Valley?
Yeah, so at the moment I am sourcing some fruit from some good growers from good parts or specific parts of the region to sort of blend in with. It's primarily Pinot Grigio that I'm sourcing, and I do that strategically, working on 2 levels, working with good growers that are really easy to work with and are passionate about producing good grapes, and also where primarily their temperature, the temperature of their zone that they're growing in, because I don't want to have too much fruit coming from a warm zone, but I want a little bit, but I don't want too much coming from a cold zone. So it's quite strategically done to try and produce the best that we can.
Fascinating, yeah. And something from the questionnaires that you filled in, before we started recording, which I'm, really interested to hear a bit more about, is actually the soil mapping that you mentioned. I mean, it sounds as though that maybe is already, informing a little bit what you started talking about and how you started describing. But maybe if you could just I guess make some connections between what's coming out in terms of the outputs from that soil mapping, the sites where you're planting kind of what, and also maybe any other sort of longer term interesting geological forces really that have gone into shaping that particular part of Australia.
Yeah, so I guess so we've been working with a winemaker from Italy called Alberto Antonini, and he's been working with us since 1999 is when we first started to engage a consultant. And at the time, we really didn't know much about producing high-quality wine. We thought we did, but so having his working with him on on a really great level, he started to introduce us to the techniques of how to make some really to grow grapes for quality wine. Mm-hmm. So it's really through his relationship and also just his journey in his winemaking career, where he has introduced us to a fellow called Pedro Parra, and he's based in South America. And he's a fellow who is just his focus is soil and grapes, soil and wine. That is just what he has trained himself in. So he's extremely clever, and he's the type of fellow that he could take a look at the soil, and he would tell you exactly how the wine would be. So I've been incredibly fortunate to be able to be working with him and a fellow with his skill set and insight. So we embarked in 2019. We started a soil mapping process. So, and it really largely came about. We were doing a project, a Sangiovese project in the King, and I was sort of leading a group of winemakers and grape growers, and we were making Sangiovese from all of the different growers in the area, just to try and give them an idea of what style of wine that their area was making, which then sort of led into sort of the King Valley was largely set up to produce commercial amounts of grapes. So without a huge amount of soil work understanding. The traditional farming, I've walked through that patch of, and I know that, it's not very good in that patch. Just looking from the surface and maybe digging a hole down a few inches to understand what might be happening. Whereas what we're doing now is building an in-depth understanding of what's actually happening down 2 meters down to understand exactly what's going on. What are the vines actually feeding on? But what happens when you have a 10-acre vineyard, it might cross 4 different sort of soil types. And within that soil type, there might be this amazing patch of grapes that just gets harvested all together in this one big vat, basically. So for me, it was a lost opportunity for our region to increase its reputation for producing high quality wines. So I've really been pushing and trying to encourage other growers in the area to sort of just take another look through their vineyards and to get a better understanding, because I think there is some great opportunities that are still that have been left in the paddock. So that's what has really driven me. Is I've only got a small amount of land, and I don't want to waste any of it. So I really want to know what I actually have, so I can make sure that any sort of patch of ground that we've got, we can maximise its use and produce the best grapes that we can to make the best wine that we can. But if I don't have that soil, I've got an understanding of what I have. So then I go, well, actually, I'm going to make this commercial wine. I'm going to do the best I can with what I have, and I'm going to do a lot of it, and try to stay in business for as long as I can. So that's, I guess, the backstory. It's also what the mapping also does. It helps with your succession planning and your forward planning for your redevelopments. And just say, look, I have a vineyard manager, and my vineyard manager can now have a look at these maps and go, I know where the wet spots are, I know where the dry spots, I know where the reserve is coming from. I know, instantly, without having to spend too much time over years to sort of collate that information. It's extremely valuable. It also helps with your irrigation mapping as well. So to set up your irrigation systems to say, well, that patch of grapes over there, it actually doesn't need any irrigation, even though it's in the same vineyard. But most vineyards are set up with the dripper line that goes through both soil types. So it starts to give you that option to design your irrigation systems to facilitate higher end wines and to have more control over the output. So we do what they call is an electromagnetic scan of the soil, and that shoots in a little electronic pulse down to 80 centimetres and 1.2 metres. And then it just sends up another signal, and it puts a little dot on your map, puts a colour on it. But what it is telling us is that there's a change in the soil here. It doesn't tell you why there is a change. It just tells you where the changes are. So then we analyse that map and go, okay, we need to dig a hole here and a number of different pits down to 2 metres to then understand what that change actually is. And then we get another map that overlays this map to, identify all of the little areas where the soil type is the same or different. So we end up with what we call polygons through the vineyards based on, and it just collating the soil types and the differences. So then we go about picking the blocks according to this soil map. So it just gives us the flexibility to understand that, because what you do find is that there's different ripeness levels. That patch of soil will ripen a little earlier or a little later than the other, or vice versa, or whatever the case is. So then it just gives you the flexibility to go, I'm going to pick this section out today, and then next week I'm picking out the other section. But it also gives you the flexibility to fine-tune your winemaking techniques. So I have one particular soil type where it's quite powdery dirt, and it's of a particular type of soil that gives rise to hard tannins. So I have to be really careful with that. And in hindsight, because I've planted Nebbiolo there, I probably wouldn't have put Nebbiolo there because that's accentuating an already tannic variety even more. So then, but I know that knowledge now, so I will pick it differently and I will make it differently because I know why it has dry tannin. So now I've made my fine-tuning, so we are really making those single vineyard wines and single batch wines. So that part of it's really exciting. We've only just started to make wines using the polygon system this year, and it's really showing some great promise. So I've got Alberto coming out in February, and I'm really looking forward to sort of analysing these wines with him to gain even more understanding and knowledge as to what the flavour profile that the soil is contributing. So that's a bit of a gap in my knowledge at the moment to understand, to make that translation of this particular soil is giving us this particular flavour profile. So
I love it. Yeah. That's a brilliant story here. I'm really just absorbing what you're saying there, because I think it's just fascinating to a typical modern day example, drawing the connections between Italy, Australia, Chile, but then equally, I think for me it's just that whole idea of and this conversation had just come up in the last podcast I've recorded, which is just that thing around, we have this perception of the kind of the romantic element of growing wine, and that the going around and touching each grape, and that's one part of the story. But I think what you've just spoken about there, it's great for the grower, in so many ways. Again, all of those different elements that you've spoken about there. It's like it's probably saving money as well. It's saving time. It's saving effort. But I think the kicker, the one that actually gets me going, and will get people out there going as well, I'm sure, is that, as you say, it's like you're uncovering these lost parcels that may never have been made as a single varietal. It's making everything better because you're more in tune with the grape. It's almost like the grapes are kind of speaking to you. They're translating and they're interpreting what's going on in the soil. But you as a human, or anyone as a human out there, are they picking up those signals? Are they able to read what the grapes are telling them, and having all of that knowledge and all of that insight into the soil and what's going on, and of course the grape variety. I think that's making it just that much more easy, isn't it, to really understand what the kind of the grapes are giving you, and give them back in return what they need for the wider benefit of the wines and ultimately the wider wine drinking community?
I guess for us, we've been producing wine for a long time now, and this is essentially our sort of first major foray into the export market. We've had plenty of opportunities earlier in the piece, and we've had a few UK buyers come over and say, we just want to buy all of your Nebbiolo, and so we could have sold all of that out 20 years ago, but we really resisted in doing that type of business, and we're very in our infancy, and so we really didn't have enough management. We didn't have enough of us to actually take us out of the business, because we were growing so rapidly, to really put the right energy into satisfying the market over there. And we also didn't really have enough wine. So we wanted to be in a position that when we do go there, that we can do it, for a longer term, and we're doing it for the right reasons, and we're doing it because we have the capacity, and it's not going to upset our customers that have been with us for a long time if we sell everything overseas and then we can't supply in Australia. So we're really held back on all of those opportunities, and have been working towards putting ourselves in a position where we can successfully do it, and do it on a long term, and all of our customers be happy. So it's the right time for us to start sending our wines overseas, and we're quite excited about the opportunity that lies ahead in England. And I know that Australia's had a very successful history there, and then took quite a nosedive. But I think the wines that we're offering in the market now, they're quite different. Where especially ours, and I know my mantra was when I first started making wine over 20 years ago was I want to make earthy, savoury, more interesting and complex styles of wine. That's what I wanted Pizzini to be, because I really wanted it to be different to the average Australian wine, which was really full of fruit, really great, clean, nicely made wines. But I just knew that Australian wines could deliver more. So that was my mantra, and I hope that we can sort of paint that picture across when we're talking about our wines, that they're a little earthier, they're more savoury, there's more licorice, there's more spice, especially in the reds, and those sorts of tones. So trying to bring something a little different to that UK community.
A huge thanks to Joel Pizzini of Pizzini Wines. You can find more info on their website, which is pizzini.com.au, or from their UK importer at enotriaco.com. Please do help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/486. You can, of course, find links to all episodes from the series in the description below. Next time on the Interpreting Wine Australia Winemaker Special series in episode 487, I'll be speaking with Kelly Pearson of Lady Garden Wines. So make sure you're subscribed to Interpreting Wine Podcast to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.